So, before I ever made guitars on a CNC, I made them like everybody else. I made them with templates and a manual handheld router. This is the second guitar I ever made, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it. In particular, I don't know if you've noticed, but this bridge is a left-handed bridge to accommodate for the proper slant for multi-scale. So I think today we're going to be talking about ingenuity versus consumerism. So when this was made a few years back, multi-scale bridges weren't easy to come by and they were expensive. So in an effort to find a way around the affordability and the scarcity of that type of hardware, I looked for other off-the-shelf methods. And let's go through this, starting from the nut all the way to the bridge. So the first thing is, when I was starting off making guitars, I was afraid to actually cut a nut and to slot it. Not only that, but I didn't have the proper nut files at the time. In fact, when I started, I only had two tools. I had my router and this bandsaw. So what I decided was to actually use an off-the-shelf nut. One of the main reasons why I was able to use an off-the-shelf pre-slotted nut was because of where the parallel fret landed on this multi-scale guitar. In, for the most part, normal multi-scale guitars, your parallel fret lands somewhere here in the middle to offset the fan in both directions. But if you take a look at the Strandberg Pliny models, the parallel fret is at the nut. So that is the parallel fret, and then the fan goes all the way to the bridge. This was perfect for a beginner luthier who didn't have access to expensive nut slotting files. In fact, the way I was able to modify the nut was simply just to sand down the bottom of it to accommodate for the height of the strings. Let's take a closer look and I'll show you. So one of the benefits of these Graphtec nuts is that they come pre-slotted and they're at the proper dimension for the width and the length. And Graphtec offers a variety of different widths and lengths and even heights. And so I was able to grab this right off the shelf. I believe I ordered it from Amazon. And the only type of update that I needed to do to ensure this fit was to sand the bottom of it. So I literally got a block of wood and some sandpaper, and I just grabbed this nut and I went back and forth. And then I would test fit it, test the string height, and then I would just keep doing that over and over again until it was the proper fit. So this allowed me to build this custom guitar without the need of special tools like nut slotting files. So I think for those builders who want to make a custom multi-scale guitar and don't have the right tools to customize a nut, they can easily get away with a pre-slotted off-the-shelf nut, as long as they're willing to use the nut as the parallel fret for their multi-scale neck. So several years ago, when I started building guitars, I was pretty ambitious and I jumped right into multi-scale. I didn't bother building a traditional style guitar. And at the time, several years ago, multi-scale bridges were very expensive and hard to come by. There was only a handful of manufacturers making them, and they were very pricey, out of the range of a new guitar builder. So I actually decided to investigate off-the-shelf options. And what I came up with is using a left-handed Telecaster bridge. Left-handed bridges were abundant back then, and they were relatively cheap compared to right-handed bridges. In fact, I think I picked this one up at the time for $9. That's crazy. There's not very many left-handed people out there, so it kind of makes sense. Now, of course, the reason why we use a left-handed bridge is because of the slant of the bridge pickup. In a traditional right-handed bridge, that slant goes the other way. Some might argue that that other way is actually the wrong way. It really moves the low end part of the pickup further away from the bridge, which reduces that pick attack, and it moves the high end portion closer to the bridge, which increases the shrilliness of the tonal characteristics. So a left-handed bridge actually sounds and feels to my ears a lot better than a right-handed bridge, but more importantly, visually speaking, that slant aligns with the fan. So in this particular case, the only thing I had to do was take the template, flip it around, align the center line, and route. It was that simple. So let's take a closer look at what we had to do to modify the saddles. So in order to get these saddles to slant correctly to accommodate for the multi-scale, you're going to need to replace the bolts and get longer ones for the high strings. You can get away with using the original bolt for the low E string, but I opted to replace all the bolts to these Allen head type bolts. That way I can use a single multi-tool that contains all sizes of Allen keys to adjust intonation as well as saddle height. So the first bolt here is 15 millimeters long. The next one for the A string is 20. The two middle strings are 25 mil, and then the last two high strings are 30 mil. Pretty easy. I sourced all these bolts from a caster car, and I'll go ahead and try to leave a link in the description. You'll notice that these are smooth head Allen bolts, and these last two here are knurled. I wasn't able to find the shorter bolts with the smooth head, so I had to use these knurled ones, which kind of bothers me visually. Even though I think this is a really slick way to mod a Telecaster bridge. Now I was able to use the original spring for the low E string. The rest I had to source, and those were a little harder to find. I'm sure you can get away with stacking two springs for the longer ones, but I opted to find actual springs that I could cut to size. I ended up finding these at Ace Hardware. Ace Hardware is just a local hardware store here in Austin. It's a national chain, and they have a lot of tiny little trinkets like this that you can easily find. I don't know where to find these online, but again, you're going to need to get longer springs for the 30 mil and the 25. So a lot of folks might have a problem with buying a Chinese counterfeit of a Hipshot multi-scale bridge. And a lot of people might have issues with just buying a Chinese single saddle headless bridge as well. And that's the value of this. You can get a Fender-branded left-handed Telecaster bridge, a set of lengthy screws from a caster car, and you can design your own custom bridge this way. These saddles are a satin finish. I believe I got these from a Squire bridge, and I opted for the Squire bridge because I wanted to use metric bolts. I think these are M4 bolts. They could be M5, but I wanted them to be able to fit in the threads of these overseas metric Squire saddles. And this is just a standard Fender bridge plate. It might be a little hard to see, but when you're using these left-handed bridges for multi-scale, you're going to have to drill new holes for the string throughs that match where the saddles are. And that's easy enough too. You simply just measure from the point you need, put a mark in there, and then drill through the plate and drill through the wood. The original string through holes are still back there. I'm not sure you can see them, but you can't make them out with the springs and the bolts hiding them. So today, these days in 2021, it's actually not that hard to find affordable multi-scale hardware. Hipshot sells a few hardtail designs at I think 2 or 3 different angles. There are also a lot of Chinese counterfeits of those Hipshot products that are very inexpensive. Going headless, there's a lot of Chinese options as well that are ridiculously cheap. I still feel that this left-handed bridge has a value today. Let me explain. When it comes to things like lockdowns and pandemics and issues with supply chains, sometimes it's hard to get overseas bridges. And a lot of the times those Hipshot products are still slightly out of reach of beginner builders. It isn't hard to find a cheap, inexpensive, Fender-branded left-handed Telecaster bridge. I like Hipshot hardtail bridges. I like headless bridges. They look very modern, sometimes maybe a little too metal. But if you wanted to stick with the iconic Telecaster look and still design multi-scale, then you can't beat this method. This looks like a Telecaster, with the exception of this custom pickguard. I think it's a great design. I think it allows you to maintain the iconicism of a Telecaster when using a left-handed Tele bridge for multi-scale guitars. I think that even if you weren't building a multi-scale guitar, you should explore a left-handed Telecaster bridge, simply because of the way the pickup is slanted. So, thanks for listening to this nostalgic story about one of my first guitar builds. Thanks for watching, and take it easy.